everyone, we have spent a lot of time talking about the nutritional needs of breastfeeding moms, as well as the composition of human breast milk. And today we're going to talk about breastfeeding support. So we've had some discussions about whether you were breastfed and why your mom made that choice. And maybe that brought up some things or some barriers that your mom may have experienced around that time. So we're going to put that into perspective today and also talk about some ways that we can overcome those barriers and some initiatives and programs that are designed to help overcome those barriers to help to support moms who are breastfeeding. Now, I like to start with this video. We're going to talk about WIC later specifically, but I like to show this video first because I think it shows how a well-rounded support for a breastfeeding mom, how important that is, because it does take a village for a mom to be able to overcome all of the barriers that she may experience. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but I just want you to keep that into perspective that there's a lot of different things that can make it difficult for a mom to breastfeed. And if we know how beneficial it is both for mom and for baby, then we need to be doing all that we can to help moms be successful in breastfeeding. So before we continue on, just a couple of reminders. Your case study for prenatal nutrition is due tonight at 11:59 p.m. And exam 1, which is on chapters 2, 4, 5, and 6, is going to be next Monday. This is going to be an online exam because we can't all fit in the classroom at one time. So you are going to need Lockdown Browser from Respondus to take this. It'll be predominantly multiple choice questions with one essay or short answer question. It will be timed, so just be sure that you remember that. And I have also posted a Kahoot for you to review, and I will post that on Moodle, and it will be open until, Sunday night at 11:59. Okay, so before we can talk about the barriers or the programs that are designed to help improve breastfeeding rates and success, let's talk about some of the goals. And first, let's take a look at the rates of breastfeeding in the United States from a historical perspective. So we saw that about in the 1900s, almost all of infants were breastfed. But whenever infant formula or the human milk substitute, which the book refers to it as, was created in 1950 or 1960, there was an absolutely astronomically large drop in breastfeeding rates to almost below 30% around this time. So formula was available, and why weren't they supposed to use it? But as time went on, we saw that breastfeeding and human breast milk were so beneficial, and research continued to show the benefits both for mom and baby. So in the 1970s and 1980s, those decades following the creation of infant formula, we saw breastfeeding rates did increase, and they peaked at about 60% of breastfeeding or of infants that are breastfed in the 1980s. Then again, we saw a decline around the 1990s. I think that this may be due in part to more women going back into work and more women working full-time jobs rather than part-time jobs, and maybe some, especially workplace barriers set into place at this point in time. But since the 2000s, we've seen rates are beginning to pick up, and a lot of that can be in thanks to some of the programs and initiatives that we've designed to help increase breastfeeding rates, which we'll talk about. So we've talked about Healthy People 2020 as it relates to the other life cycle stages. We also have some Healthy People 2020 objectives that are based on breastfeeding. So this is on page 173 in your book, but you see that some of the key goals are to increase the proportion of infants who are breastfed and also the duration. So we'll look at the recommendation for 6 months versus a year. Increase the proportion of employers who have worksite lactation support programs. So if we see that working is a barrier, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, we want to have workplaces that are going to be able to support breastfeeding moms. Another goal is to reduce the proportion of breastfed newborns who receive formula supplementation when the first 2 days of life. We'll talk a little bit more about this when we discuss the healthy or the baby-friendly hospital initiative. And then finally, increase the proportion of live births that occur in facilities that provide recommended care for lactating mothers and their babies. Again, another an objective that's related to the baby-friendly hospital initiative. So all of these also align with the Surgeon General's call to action on breastfeeding. But the main goal of this is to increase the proportion of infants who are breastfed as well as the duration in which they are breastfed. So our overall goals for breastfeeding are to exclusively breastfeed infants for the first 6 months of life. We see that if infants are exclusively breastfed for those first 6 months, they have less illness that is coming from any type of gastrointestinal infection. In general, they are going to be healthier infants in those first 6 months of life compared to infants who receive formula feeding only. So another important thing to note is that we should never give infants cow's milk before the age of 6 months, because that the iron and the proteins in that cow's milk is not easily digested, and it can actually harm the infant's GI tract and can cause some blood loss through the digestive tract. So we never want to give cow's milk. So the other breastfeeding goal beyond 6 months is to continue breastfeeding for a year or beyond, or as long as baby and mom would like. And again, we see less infections and illness in general in children who are breastfed up to a year and beyond compared to infants who are not breastfed and who receive infant formula. So these are some of the key items in the 2011 Surgeon General's call to action on breastfeeding. So this is addressing some of those key barriers to successful breastfeeding among new mothers. So we see lack of knowledge, social norms getting in the way, poor family and social support, lactation problems, embarrassment, employment and childcare difficulties, as well as barriers related to health services. So this is really the Surgeon General saying, hey, these are our barriers to successful breastfeeding, and these are the things that we need to address in any programs or support services. So just to talk about a few of these, lack of knowledge, even though breastfeeding is thought to be like this entirely natural thing, it doesn't always come naturally, and sometimes women need to be taught how to breastfeed so that it isn't painful, or how to know if they're pumping enough, or if they're feeding their baby enough for them to grow and develop normally. So knowledge is important, and education is important. Social norms that say women shouldn't breastfeed in public, or maybe they're just uncomfortable with breastfeeding because they don't want to be exposed. Those are barriers and things that we can support women through. This kind of goes with social norms. If it's abnormal for family members not to breastfeed, and there's this one lone soldier who wants to try it out, they may face different opinions and lack of support if their family members haven't gone through it and can't really give them that guidance or support. Problems with lactation are very common. So maybe the latch isn't just right, and mom is having some pain, or maybe the baby is falling asleep too quickly whenever they are latched. So there's lots of things that can be difficulties, and having the proper guidance and support can really help moms be successful. Embarrassment, of course, is another issue, and this is especially prevalent in women, for women who don't have that family support and whose social norms do say that isn't a natural or normal thing. Employment and childcare are huge barriers. So if mom goes back to work and say there's not a place for her to pump, or she doesn't have the proper pump, or things like that, that's going to make it difficult for her to be successful breastfeeding. And then also barriers related to health services. So what type of services are available to mom? Does she have insurance? Is she provided with formula, with free samples of formula? So all of these things can help to guide these programs, but these are things that are prevalent in the United States specifically that are going to reduce the rate of breastfeeding. So on top of that, there's gaps in breastfeeding based on different factors, like geographical factors. There's certain states, especially southern, more rural states, that have lower rates of breastfeeding. Race and ethnicity come into play. Education comes into play as well. So women who are more highly educated tend to have greater rates in breastfeeding. Marital status, and this kind of goes along with support. So women who are single moms more often do not breastfeed compared to women who are married. They do breastfeed more often. And then as well as income level. So these are all gaps in breastfeeding that need to be addressed. So here we're looking at the table on page 174, and this describes some levels of support that are needed for increasing breastfeeding. So we saw the Surgeon General's issues that the Surgeon General points out. So how can we overcome those? So these are actions for each sort of unit that mom will interact with. So whether it's their families or in their communities, within the healthcare system, within employment, and then research and public health infrastructure. So all of these actions would help to increase rates of breastfeeding. So let's continue on with breastfeeding support and some initiatives that are currently in place. As far as birthplace and hospital settings, we've made leaps and bounds in how we support moms and kind of set them up for success. So you'll hear a lot about skin-to-skin contact, education prior to delivery, early and frequent breastfeeding as soon as baby is born, exclusive breastfeeding while in the hospital, rooming in, and active follow-up. So these all sort of create the framework for the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative, which we'll see on the next slide. And there's these 10 steps to becoming a baby-friendly hospital and getting that designation. But we heard about skin-to-skin contact in the video that we watched previously from the lactation consultant. And what that is mom and baby make skin-to-skin contact. So there's no clothing barrier or anything within the first 30 minutes after birth. So that really can help with bonding, release of oxytocin, those hormones that help with breast milk production and milk letdown. They also work on teaching mom and family about breastfeeding before delivery and within the at the hospital. They'll have a lactation consultant available that will come and check on mom and make sure the baby is latching well. They also try to initiate breastfeeding very quickly, usually within the first 30 minutes. And they encourage breastfeeding on demand. So if baby is hungry, and instead of like trying to do like a feed every 3 hours or 2 hour schedule, they recommend that if baby is showing signs of hunger, you breastfeed, and that can help to improve breastfeeding long term. Rooming in is having baby and mom in the same room. When I was born, it was common practice for hospitals to have nurseries where the baby would go sleep during the night and give mom an opportunity for rest. But this is not included in the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative guidelines. So they keep baby and mom in the same room together for most of the time. And then after delivery, they actively follow up with mom, try to get her into some support groups so that she can continue to be successful with breastfeeding. So these are things also that we want to encourage mom to speak up about and to learn before birth, so that she's aware that these may be issues or barriers that she may have to overcome, and she can speak up whenever she feels that she may be having an issue or isn't understanding something correctly. So really empowering mom to, one, have that knowledge, but also two, to be able to ask for education and assistance. So these are the basic principles for the baby-friendly hospitals. There's these 10 steps to successful breastfeeding, and that's what those programs are sort of built upon or founded upon. So they must have a breastfeeding policy that's written and it's communicated to all healthcare staff. And on top of that, the necessary healthcare staff are trained to be able to implement that policy properly. All pregnant women are informed about the benefits and management of breastfeeding, and they help moms to initiate breastfeeding within 30 minutes of birth. They show moms how to breastfeed and how to maintain lactation even if they're separated from their baby. And that really can help with that barrier of returning to work in the future. They won't give infants food or drink other than breast milk unless it's completely medically necessary. So they won't give like formula samples for free, or give the infant formula unless they really have a health condition that requires it. Again, they'll do rooming in where the mom and baby will stay together for the first 24 hours. They encourage breastfeeding on demand. They won't give any artificial pacifiers to breastfeeding infants. And the reason for this is they say that it can sort of like confuse baby if they have that artificial pacifier, because it kind of is supposed to simulate breastfeeding, but it can kind of confuse them. So. And then finally, they foster the establishment of breastfeeding support groups and refer moms to them on discharge from the hospital or birth center. So that's just all going to help to support mom beyond that birth. Okay, so I am going to show you guys a couple of websites. This is the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative website. It talks about the history of the program, as well as their philosophy. So some of the things that I just read, basically it's about supporting mom, empowering mom with education, as well as those specific practices that are going to help to make breastfeeding successful for that mom. So one of the cool things about this website is that you can look up hospitals that have the baby-friendly designation in your area. So I'll just do this Thibodaux area, and we'll see which hospitals are around. So in the Baton Rouge area, we know we have Women's Hospital. Let's see. In Raceland, there's the Ochsner Hospital. And in Houma, Terrebonne General Medical Center is a baby-friendly designated hospital. So I've already pulled up the Terrebonne General website that discusses their baby-friendly designation. So they talk about some of the things that they offer to their moms and newborns to support breastfeeding. They have, let's see, they talk about how they promote skin to skin. It helps with mom's bond and calming for the baby. They have times where there are no visitors allowed from 2 to 4 p.m. to help the parents bond, rest, and recover with the baby. They have lactation consultants that are available, and they will meet with mom prior to delivery to answer any questions, but they'll also help in the hospital to help that make sure that latch is going well. And then they have breastfeeding support groups as well that are offered to the new moms so that they can continue to have support after they've given birth. So these are some more classes that they offer with their Bright Beginnings program, the breastfeeding classes being one of those. So great stuff with those baby-friendly hospitals. Okay, so one of the main contributors to limiting success for women who want to breastfeed is returning to work. So it's important that we discuss some of these barriers. And the biggest barriers that we see related to the workplace is lack of on-site daycares, insufficiently paid maternity leave. So mom is having to return to work more quickly, maybe before she's ready, maybe before she's been able to get into that routine. At that time, baby is still going to be feeding really frequently as well. Work schedules may be really rigid, so it may be difficult for mom to take a break and pump, or to leave and go breastfeed her baby if it's at home or at a daycare nearby. But then also one of the biggest things is employers who just don't know enough about breastfeeding. And if they aren't educated themselves, then they can't support moms adequately. So some of the legislation that, or topics of legislation related to the workplace are listed here. So there is a policy in place right now that says women can breastfeed anywhere on federal property. Okay, we have a happy face here. These next three pieces of legislation have not been passed, but they're in the works. They say, or the goal is to say that women can't be fired or discriminated against if they breastfeed during lunchtime or breaks. They also want to pass a law that says tax credits can be provided to employers who provide lactation services. And we'll talk a little bit about that, as well as minimum standards for breast pump safety. Because if mom is returning to work and still wants to breastfeed, she's going to have to pump more likely than not. So women, and the reason that this is so important is because women who continue to breastfeed after returning to work, they miss less work because their infants aren't as sickly. And they have shorter absences if they do miss for an infant illness compared to infants who are not breastfed. So it's it's good for workplaces to provide support to breastfeeding moms because it shows us here that they're going to miss less work if they can continue breastfeeding. Okay, so these are some important elements for worksite lactation programs. So this is describing what workplaces can do to support women who are breastfeeding. So what we could do outside of like a specific workplace is provide education to women specific to when they return to work. So how can they continue breastfeeding? How can they pump? How can they fit that into their schedule? Creating policies for the corporate world that provide information for all employees on the benefits of breastfeeding and on why their coworkers need support if they are breastfeeding. So again, this would just set the stage for greater support within the workplace. More education for the women themselves, providing adequate breaks, flexible work hours, and this would just help mom to be able to continue fitting breastfeeding into her schedule. Providing a place that is relaxing and safe for mom to breastfeed is a big thing. So you'll see breastfeeding rooms in many places now. We have one on campus, but like some hospitals will have mother's rooms or breastfeeding rooms as well. Giving access to breast pumps. This is one thing that WIC specifically helps with. Providing refrigerators to store milk safely, because if you don't have that at work, you have to carry around another bag that has ice packs in it and all that stuff, and you got to keep that clean, all of this. So these are just several things that they can do within the working or the corporate world to help support breastfeeding moms. So there are several model breastfeeding promotion programs. We're going to specifically talk about WIC. Before I say that, I'm going to play this video.
What is WIC breastfeeding support? It's encouragement, empowerment, and experience to make breastfeeding work. It's people who know you got this, who know you want to get this, and who can help you reach your breastfeeding goals. WIC breastfeeding support is out when you need it, so you and your baby can learn together and grow together, month by month, day by day, feeding by feeding, from the people who know about good nutrition for moms and babies.
We know breastfeeding is a journey filled with ups and downs and feelings of accomplishment and frustration.
So WIC breastfeeding support is here to help you no matter what stage you're in, whether it's learning about breastfeeding, starting to breastfeed, overcoming breastfeeding challenges, and thriving as a breastfeeding mom. WIC breastfeeding support is access to WIC lactation experts with breastfeeding classes and breastfeeding information to help you be successful.
It's connecting with other breastfeeding moms and coaching from WIC peer counselors, moms like you who have breastfeeding experience and know how to help you succeed too.
It's tips, tools, and inspiration to make breastfeeding work for you. WIC breastfeeding support is a website where you can hear from breastfeeding moms, where you can hear about their journey and their challenges with milk production, lack of confidence, lack of support, managing busy lifestyles, and what they did to power through.
And it's resources for your support network, dad, grandma, partners, and friends, so that they can learn the best ways to help you.
WIC breastfeeding support is where you turn when you're not sure where to turn. It's answers when you need them from people who want you to meet your breastfeeding goals. And it's encouragement from people who know it gets easier and that you can do it together. Learn together, start together, overcome together, thrive together, grow together with WIC breastfeeding support.
So WIC is really a great program that does more than just breastfeeding support, but they really are set up to really assist women and help them to be successful for breastfeeding. So just a reminder of what is WIC. It stands for Women, Infant, Children. As far as eligibility for women goes, women who are pregnant or breastfeeding are eligible, and they are eligible for up to 1 year postpartum. So what they do is provide education about breastfeeding before and after birth. They have money allocated in the federal budget to provide pumps to women, and this helps women to continue breastfeeding if they have to return to work. They have peer counselors that can assist women through any barriers or difficulties that they are having with breastfeeding or with anything related to caring for their baby. And then they also have a hotline that women can reach out to at any time for assistance and support. So some of the key messages for the breastfeeding support initiatives at WIC are to help women feel comfortable with breastfeeding, so addressing some of those support issues, social norm issues, provide tips on breastfeeding, and how that can work around their busy schedule, so trying to overcome those workplace barriers, and then getting involvement of family and friends to make breastfeeding a success. So one of the things that they do is really try to get the father or partner involved to better that partner support, and we do see that that's working. So outcomes at the state level show that there's better initiation and duration of breastfeeding for women who are able to interact with the WIC program. They have better partner support, and they have increased support from their accessory relatives, so their moms and their siblings and aunts and uncles, those types of things. So in general, I think it's important that we understand the main barriers that women may experience to successful breastfeeding, and understanding how we can overcome them and what our role is in those initiatives as well. So hope that y'all enjoyed this presentation. Let me know if you have any questions.